Hey there. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're uncovering Henry Hazlitt's foundational framework for evaluating, well, absolutely any economic policy. Whether you're looking at local community spending or those massive national budgets, there's this one fundamental filter through which all these decisions should be passed. We're going to explore the core concepts from Hazlitt's classic text, Economics in One Lesson, focusing specifically on the really powerful dynamic between what's immediately visible to us and what remains completely hidden.
So, let's start our detective story with a pretty provocative question, one that challenges a widely accepted belief about wars and disasters. Does destruction actually create prosperity? You hear this all the time, right? A hurricane wipes out a town, or a war levels a city, and inevitably, someone points out that the rebuilding effort is going to create this huge economic boom. They count the houses that need replacing, the new factories that'll be built, the surge in construction jobs. And honestly, it sounds logical at first, doesn't it? But is this burst of activity actually a net gain for society?
Well, to answer that, we really have to act as economic detectives. We need to find the hidden secondary consequences of any action. This right here is Hazlitt's one lesson in a nutshell. The art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate, but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy, not merely for one group, but for all groups. Bad economics focuses only on the short-term effects on one specific group, like, say, the people getting paid to rebuild a destroyed city. But good economics? That requires us to trace the consequences of a policy not just for today, but for tomorrow. And not just for the group that gets the money, but for absolutely everybody else who might be impacted.
Let's look at our first case study. Section 1, the broken window fallacy, uncovering the hidden victims. Imagine this simple scene. A young hoodlum heaves a brick through a baker's shop window. Now, obviously, the shopkeeper is furious, but a crowd gathers outside to stare at the shattered glass, and as they reflect on the situation, they actually start to talk themselves into a rather surprising conclusion. They assume the vandalism is actually an economic net positive. Crazy, right? But why? Because they figure the baker is going to have to hire a glazier to fix the window, and that creates new business.
Let's actually put a number on it. The baker now has to spend $50 on a new window. And that $50 becomes exactly the glazier's gain. The glazier will then take that $50 and spend it with other merchants, who will then spend it with others, in this endless chain of economic stimulation. If you follow this logic all the way to its end, the crowd might actually conclude that the hoodlum who threw the brick was a public benefactor.
But hold on, here's the brilliant illustration of the unseen consequence. Because of that broken window, the baker can no longer buy the $50 suit he had planned to get that very afternoon. The glazier's gain of business is literally just the tailor's loss of business. No new employment was added to the community. It was only diverted from the tailor over to the glazier. You see, the crowd only saw two parties, the baker and the glazier. They completely forgot the third party, the tailor, because he never enters the scene. The community isn't any richer. It's simply missing a window or a suit it otherwise would have had.
Now, let's scale this up a bit. Section 2, the cost of public works, taxation and diversion.
Let's say the government decides to build a $1 million bridge. Now, if the bridge is absolutely essential to solve a massive traffic problem, well, that's one thing. But very often, these projects are proposed primarily just to provide employment. And here's the catch. If the government builds a $1 million bridge purely to create 500 jobs, that exact same amount must be taken directly from the taxpayers. Every single dollar spent on the bridge is a dollar taken from someone else's pocket.
Notice the stark contrast here between the visible public jobs created and the invisible private jobs destroyed by those taxes. We can easily see the bridge going up, right? We can watch the 500 workers in their hard hats. It makes for fantastic photographs. But what we cannot see are the unbuilt private homes, the unpurchased cars, and the unmade clothing that the taxpayers would have bought if they had been allowed to keep that $1 million.
This means even massive, highly photogenic projects, like the TVA's Norris Dam, are built with expropriated private capital. It makes one specific section comparatively richer, but it makes all other sections comparatively poor. When taxes are taken from people nationwide and funneled into one specific region, sure, that region obviously gets a boost, but we have to remember the rest of the country. We have to use our imagination to see the private power plants, the private homes, the washing machines, and the radios that were never allowed to come into existence simply because those funds were redirected by the government.
Moving right along to Section 3, the curse of machinery, demystifying the job loss myth. Hazlitt poses this really interesting question. Why should freight be carried by railroad when we could employ enormously more men to carry it on their backs? He brings this up to objectively examine the logic of folks like Eleanor Roosevelt, who argued that labor-saving devices are only good if they don't displace workers. Think about it. If our only goal is to maximize the sheer number of human beings doing physical labor, why use railroads at all? We could employ millions more people to literally carry freight across the country on their backs. But obviously, that would be completely absurd, and it would keep us all in a state of absolute poverty.
Let's look at some historical data. Way back in 1776, Adam Smith noted that machinery allowed a single pin maker to produce 4,800 pins a day, instead of struggling to make just one, or maybe 20 by hand. Now, if machines merely destroyed jobs, the pin-making industry would have experienced near total unemployment almost immediately, right? But, as you probably guessed, that is not what happened.
Let's trace the history of this machine phobia. Back in 1760, Richard Arkwright invented cotton spinning machinery. At the time, there were about 7,900 people making cotton textiles in England, and they fiercely opposed the machine. They were absolutely terrified for their livelihoods. Yet, by 1787, just 27 years later, a parliamentary inquiry showed that employment in the cotton industry had actually skyrocketed to 320,000. That is a staggeringly high employment increase of 4,400%. Fast forward to 1932, and you had groups like the technocrats mistakenly blaming machinery for mass depression unemployment. But history proves, time and time again, that manufacturing efficiency actually breeds entirely new jobs.
So how does this actually work in practice? Let's trace the exact economic sequence of a new machine. Step 1. The machine lowers production costs. Say a new machine allows a manufacturer to drop the price of an overcoat from $50 down to $30. Step 2. The manufacturer makes an extra profit initially, but eventually competition forces them to pass these savings on to the consumers. So step 3. The consumer gets the exact same coat, but now they have $20 left over that they wouldn't have had before. And finally, step 4. They take that $20 and spend it elsewhere. Maybe they buy a new pair of shoes or a radio. That leftover $20 creates unseen jobs in entirely different sectors of the economy, completely offsetting any jobs lost to the machine in the coat factory. It's like a giant puzzle where the pieces just shift to create a bigger, better picture.
And that brings us to Section 4, Production over Employment, the true economic goal.
We constantly hear politicians arguing for full employment. They talk about it as if it's the ultimate measure of a thriving society. But think about it. Primitive tribes and prison chain gangs have maximum full employment. Everyone is working all day, every day, just to survive. But modern economic progress actually consists in getting more production with less labor. Employment is merely the means. Full production and a higher standard of living is the actual end goal we should be striving for.
We'll wrap up this explainer by leaving you with this really profound shift in perspective from Hazlitt's text. The whole economic progress of mankind has consisted in getting more production with the same labor. Wealth isn't created by forcing people into inefficient jobs or destroying what we already have just to rebuild it. It's created by innovation, by efficiency, and by allowing consumers to direct their saved resources toward new, unfulfilled needs.
Take this final thought with you. Become an economic detective in your daily life. Whenever you hear a new policy proposed, whether it's a tariff, a public works project, or some ban on a new technology, stop and ask yourself, are you only looking at the immediate, visible effects on one specific group, or are you actively looking for the unseen consequences hiding just beneath the surface that will inevitably impact everyone else? Because once you start seeing the unseen, well, your understanding of how the world really works will never be the same.